Welcome all to extraordinary meeting of Council 4524. Could I ask you all to be upstanding? I would like to show my respect and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, of elders past, present and emerging, on which this meeting takes place.
We thank you, Lord, for the honour of being called by our fellow citizens to this office of honour and trust. Give us grace diligently and honourably, free from private interest or prejudice, to discharge the duties entrusted to us to the common good and as in your sight, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Please be seated. The proceedings of all council meetings in open session, including all debate and addresses by the public, are recorded and webcast live on council's website for the purpose of facilitating community access. Webcast archives are stored and available to the public on council's website. The recordings may be disclosed under the provisions of the Government Information Public Access Act of 2009, the GIPA Act. Members of the public attending a council meeting may have their image, voice and personal information, including name and address, recorded, publicly broadcast and archived, or as an observer or other interested party. Members of the public consent to the use of their image, voice and personal information. Councillors, we have everyone here now, so there are no apologies. Declarations of interest. Call for declarations. If there are none, we will move to the only item that we will be discussing tonight, item 1.1, the Montefiore planning proposal. We have a number of speakers today to this item. And can I call first Mr. Robert Orry. Thank you, Robert. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor, General Manager, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Robert Orry. I'm the CEO of Montefiore, have been for the past 22 years. I'd like to take the opportunity just to clarify some issues regarding the proposal and also address some misinformation that we've become aware of regarding. So Montefiore is a not-for-profit charitable organisation, and we have been providing accommodation and care at the Hunters Hill campus for the past 85 years. Most importantly, we are not speculative property developers. All proceeds from the redevelopment of the Hunters Hill site will be reinvested into the delivery of aged services. These funds are predominantly used to provide quality care to those with limited financial means. Around half of the residents currently accommodated at our Hunters Hill campus are financially supported by our organisation. And just in case there's any doubt, while we're an organisation founded on Jewish values of looking after each other as we age, like many other church and religious-based aged care providers, we're open to all faiths and denominations. The proposal before council is simply seeking changes to the planning controls in height and building envelopes to enable the construction of new fit-for-purpose aged care accommodation. In relation to the mix of accommodation, the final mix has not been determined, and consultation with the community will occur as part of the subsequent DA process. Suffice to say, the final mix will take into account both the demand for particular types of aged care accommodation and the occupancy at the Hunters Hill site at the time. It is likely this will entail the construction of new residential aged care beds, possibly including a dementia-specific village, to replace older stock that is no longer fit for purpose, as well as new independent living units which are well sought after by seniors, particularly couples. This type of accommodation allows older people to age in place, have care services delivered into their apartment, and, if the need arises in the future, for one partner to access residential aged care, the remaining partner can remain close by and stay connected. Over the years, we have seen a reduction in demand for low care hostel accommodation and increasing demand for IOU accommodation with care services delivered into the apartments. We are simply responding to this change of demand. To be clear, it is untrue to suggest that we are planning on replacing a large proportion of residential aged care beds with apartments and that we will be evicting existing residents. This would be against everything that Montefiore stands for, and as as residential aged care is our core business. The rebuilding program will be
Councillors,
staged.
sorry, moved Councillor Quinn, extension of time, seconded Councillor Preston. All those in favour? Against, that is carried. Please continue.
The rebuilding program will be staged so that existing residents can be relocated before old buildings are demolished. We believe optimising the site for aged care purposes is in the best interest of the community now and into the future. It is also consistent with Council's own housing strategy, which identified that the Huntersville site could support higher density to enable delivery of more diverse accommodation offerings for seniors. We therefore encourage Council to support this planning proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ori. Sorry, Mr. Ori, could I just ask you to stand to remain at the lectern? Councillors, any questions? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Ori. I don't know whether this question is better to you or your other speaker. If you like to refer to him, that's fine. One of the things I wondered about, is there any precedent in the past in the Greater Sydney area for a planning proposal to bring about both a change to the zoning of SP2 infrastructure as well as increased building heights?
Not that I'm aware of, but I might have to defer to Peter.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Vergara.
Why are you seeking the of
Yeah.
an R3?
We saw, I mean, again, I think Peter will address that. We'll leave that to you.
I was going to address that.
I can mention it quickly. We specifically did it because we were very keen to ensure the site was dedicated to aged care. And if we didn't have it under an SP2 zoning, then it would be open sometime in the future to possibly used for residential apartment development, which is something that we didn't think was in the best interest of the community.
Councillors, any other questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Ori.
Thank you.
I will now call Mr. Peter Strudwick. Thank you, Peter. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to touch on a few things tonight. Firstly, the nature of the planning proposal, correcting some misconceptions that have been circulating amongst the community that I'm sure will be mentioned throughout the course of the evening. And I also want to make some comments on the Council's staff assessment report. Firstly, the planning proposal. This is what's called a planning proposal. It used to be called a rezoning proposal. It's not a DA. Nothing will be built as a result of tonight's decision, or indeed at the end of this planning proposal process. This proposal seeks to start a process of establishing the future controls for the site. It seeks to implement Council's endorsed housing strategy. That endorsed strategy identified increased density on this site. The community will have the opportunity of commenting on this planning proposal when it's placed on public exhibition, and they will also have the opportunity of commenting on any future DA that is lodged. This planning proposal has been now supported twice by Council's officers. All of the documents that have been reviewed by both Council officers and a range of consultants engaged by Council. They agree it should proceed to the next stage. On this basis, I will not talk a lot about technical details tonight because they have been supported twice now by Council's officers and are included in your Council report pack. I secondly want to correct some misconceptions circulating amongst the community. Firstly, in relation to height. This proposal is not 8 stories. It never has been, and nowhere in our documentation does this proposal contemplate 8 stories. Completely untrue. The site's height controls are included in both the proposed LEP amendment and a site-specific DCP, which we have worked with Council and proposed. In the LEP, it includes a measurement in metres that needs to consider the total height of the building from the lowest point on the ground, accounting for topography, right through the building to the highest point on the top of the lift overrun or rooftop plan structure. It also has to consider the variation in floor-to-floor heights for either aged care or independent living units. We have also included more detailed controls in our DCP. These detailed controls include the number of stories at the street frontage, the total number of stories overall, the setback of buildings to the street frontage, and the proportion of the roof level that can accommodate building structure. The combination of all of these controls.
Sorry, Mr. Strudwick, move extension of time. Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Prieston. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. Please continue.
Many thanks. The combination of these controls will simply not allow an 8-story building. For clarity, the site is broken up into 3 height areas. 2 stories fronting Gaza Street, the narrower street. 3 stories stepping up to 4 stories along Barron's Crescent, which is a wider street with an existing band of taller trees. And now we propose an increased setback to that property boundary of 10 metres, being at those lower floors. And a 6-story zone in the very centre of the site, screened by the street front buildings and site landscaping, located some 65 to 90 metres away from the nearest houses with no shadow impact. I want to talk about zoning, which is a matter that was raised a minute ago. This SP2, the proposed SP2 infrastructure zone, is proposed to ensure the site is retained for seniors housing and to protect the community and the perception of a sell-off for the purposes of conventional medium density housing. We've done this for the community. This exists on the Presbyterian church site at Paddington, and there's another site in Hornsby where, there are a number of sites. In fact, we may have included this in our documentation, which identifies the use of SP2 zoning for seniors housing. It's not uncommon. I understand the council officers have sought legal advice on the validity of this zoning, and they have agreed with us. The next matter I want to address is the matter of precedent. Again, a matter that was raised just a moment ago. The action group against Montefiore says that if this proposal goes ahead, it will set a precedent for all seniors sites across the municipality to do the same. Completely untrue. The council have endorsed a housing strategy. That strategy identifies 3 existing centres for further growth. Those centres are the Gladesville Town Centre, Hunters Hill Town Centre, and Baronia Park Shops. Importantly, that housing strategy also identified 2 key strategic sites for housing, including, and I quote, for in-demand typologies such as retirement living, aged care, or affordable housing. These 2 sites identified in that strategy are the Montefiore site and the former Gladesville Hospital site. This housing strategy sets the expectations and the precedent. This planning proposal sets no precedent. I now want to just briefly comment on some comments in the council staff report.
Sorry, councillors, move extension of time. Councillor Quinn, seconded Councillor Sanderson. All those in favour? Against? That is carried.
Probably got to
Please continue. That's okay. Please continue.
Further. We note that Part A, Roman numerals 2 of the resolution refers to the Part 16 metre height control. That resolution should refer to the Part 16 metre, Part 18 metre height control, which is discussed and assessed throughout the report and which is referred to on the height maps. This is an error that's acknowledged by the council's officers and should be corrected to allow the appropriate building on the street in that location, and has and the reason why it varies between 16 and 18 metres is because of the varying topography on that particular area of the site. Nevertheless, the DCP includes controls that limit that building to 3 stories at the Barron's Crescent frontage and set back 10 metres, and having the 4th level a further 3 metres. In other words, the 4th level would be set back 13 metres from the street frontage. We seek council's resolution to amend this particular error. We note that some of the reports suggest removing the vehicular access from High Street. This is some of the consultant reports. I think the Heritage report recommended removal of the vehicular access through the High Street frontage and providing an additional point on Barron's Crescent. We disagree with that suggestion, as the council officers have. This is clearly not what the residents want, and it allows the traffic to be distributed between High Street and Barron's Crescent. And finally, we note the urban design report talks about the potential for a DA to be lodged that would exceed the height controls. That is not a relevant matter now. If a DA comes in that exceeds the height controls, council has the ability to refuse it at that time. This speculation is not really helpful at this point and is not a relevant matter for tonight's consideration. In conclusion, this planning proposal follows council's housing strategy. In other words, it has strategic planning merit. From a technical sense, the planning proposal has been endorsed twice now by council staff to allow formal public exhibition in its current form. In other words, it has site-specific merit. And finally, this planning proposal addresses housing supply for a sector that urgently demands it, and will be delivered by a first-class operator in Montefiore who have owned the site for 93 years and have operated out it for the past 85 years. I suspect that they are the most senior resident in this room and are certainly the most experienced in delivering quality aged care and supported housing for older people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Strudwick. Could I ask, sorry, Mr. Strudwick, could you just remain at the podium? Councillors, any questions? Councillor Sanderson.
Yeah, just on that question I asked earlier, what it related to was whether there has been a planning proposal where you're proposing to rezone residential property to SP2 simultaneously retaining additional height. What I'd like to know is, do you know of any precedent? I don't.
I'm fairly sure that the Presbyterian Church land in Paddington did that. There was an SP2 zone land there, and there was a this was some years ago now, our company was involved in this, and that simultaneously involved increase in the height controls on that site. That's the former Scottish Hospital at Paddington. I also recall there was a project at Hornsby that did the same thing. I'm very happy to look at other precedents. But it's, as I said, it's not an uncommon issue when a proponent wants to effectively lock up a piece of special purpose land for that purpose in delivering that infrastructure and nothing else. So that's the zoning component of it. We can proceed with a residential zone if that was council's preference, but it's, as I mentioned, an objective that we thought would resonate with the community for long-term provision of this purpose rather than being used for some other purpose down the track.
Councillor Quinn.
Just with that, I presume that the one in Paddington would have been City of Sydney, or was it?
I think it's Woollahra.
Okay, well, it's interesting that it is Woollahra. I did go through their LEP zoning maps, and I think their
Sydney LEP, Jim.
Yeah, the no, yeah, that's right. Their most recent LEP is 2014, and there hasn't been any rezoning or change to SP2 seniors housing in that time. So I presume the development then would have proceeded 2014.
I don't know how long ago it proceeded. Actually, it was some time ago we were involved in it. I wasn't involved in it personally, but very happy to provide council with a list of SP2 seniors housing proposals within the Sydney Metro area. Again, not an uncommon exercise. You're sort of thinking of things on the run here. I think there's something out of Blacktown as well. So it's seniors housing sites are traditionally residential zones. That's the way they're sort of merged. So that's their traditional zoning, but they don't have to be zoned in that fashion.
Councillor Quinn.
Yes, can I ask, obviously one of the most contentious issues with this proposal is the heights. Why the proposal to have it, 24 metres, for example, and not a lower level? I realise that means you might have to go out further at the ground level. Can you explain why the need to go to 24 metres?
I guess I can answer that in a couple of ways. This is it's an aged care asset that's existed there for some time. And with any asset like there where you've got tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure tied up, you want to make optimum use of that asset and plan it in a way that optimises the location of the site. Our approach to this has always been to optimise the site's potential for the long term. And we've gone about a master planning process where we have looked at all parts of the site and feel that the three height zones that I mentioned, the one along Barron's Crescent, one along Gaza Street being the lower 2-storey one, best reflected that context. A higher zone along Barron's Crescent, given again the circumstances of the slightly wider street and the trees that exist in that area and the separation that exists between that development and those houses. And that then left us the middle of the site that we thought, well, there is an area in the middle of the site where you can develop a taller building to optimise the density, but reduce the footprint so that you can retain as many trees as possible. So when we came and met your officers 3 years ago, yes, there was concerns about height. There's no doubt about that. But one of the concerns that we took away from that discussion was the need to preserve as many trees and as much bushland as possible. We've also taken the opportunity of taking the cars away from the ground plane and try to pedestrianise the ground plane in many ways by putting a basement car park in. So the way to achieve the balance of all those issues is a smaller footprint building, which means the potential for greater height. And that's those 2 6-storey buildings are in a part of the site that is largely screened by the fig trees. It's well separated from the residential properties and provides no shadow impact. So in impact terms, it is one that doesn't have an impact on neighbouring properties. Now, some people may say, well, that's 6 stories and it's much bigger than our 2-storey house. And at a factual level, it is. And we're not disputing that. But we have to balance this matter between what is set in a policy and what the state is striving for and what is needed in the local area on one hand, and the environmental impacts and the impacts on the local community on another. And we've been through this master planning process now for 3 years. We've got great architects and great advisors, and we feel very strongly that we've got that balance right.
Councillors, any further questions?
Yes.
Councillor Quinn.
Yes, and I notice in the proposal there's a variety of configurations from 1 to 3 bed. I'm assuming that means 3-bedroom apartments. Is that right?
Yeah, if it's that's likely to be the case. There's, as Rob mentioned a minute ago, we have yet to go through the exercise of understanding what composition they're going to be. There's been some market testing that will be required to work out, whether they will be 1, 2 or 3 bedrooms or what sort of configuration of facilities they'll have.
Mm-hmm. So then with the number of bedrooms and the available parking space that goes with each one of those apartments, what balance is there with that? So it's a 3-bedroom apartment, there's 3 parking spaces, for example.
Well,
I assume not.
Good question. We have adopted very much a philosophy of providing a basement car park that will provide sufficient parking for all configurations that might exist ultimately, and we feel that a 2-level basement car park will do that. So we have enough space in a 2-level basement car park. We almost have enough space at 1 level. We're not quite sure. But we feel confident that certainly at a 2-level basement parking configuration, we have enough space to accommodate not only all staff associated with the project, but visitors and all configurations of any ILU combination. Now, we haven't been through that exercise yet. We'll go through that exercise, which will determine actually how many parking spaces we'll need to provide, and that will be included in the DA. But it's comforting for us to say, well, we've got a land size and a configuration that can address all of that and take existing parking that's currently located in, some in the surrounding streets, mainly on High Street in front of Baronia Park, and put those in the underground car park.
The reason I asked that, I'm intrigued to know, perhaps you can answer this or whether Robert can answer it. In an aged care facility, the need for a 3-bedroom apartment. That suggests a family, for example. So I'm just intrigued to know why that consideration would be there.
Yeah.
There must be some science behind it.
Oh, I might defer to Robert. What I would say is that obviously you've got situations where you've got the husband and the wife, or male and female people, and then they may have grandchildren visiting them, or a friend visiting them overnight, or used as a study, for example. That's a typology that's very common in emerging independent living units. Probably,
If you speak to most retirement living operators and people that work in remote.
Robert, sorry, can I ask you if you come forward, because they're listening in the halls, say near the microphone? Thanks.
If you talk to most retirement living operators and or people that do the market research for them, there is clearly greater demand for larger apartments now than smaller ones. People are coming out of larger homes, usually downsizing. They don't want to compromise too much coming out of it. But as Peter said, they consider, their lifestyle, but they also consider having grandchildren staying over and so forth. So most of these apartments are occupied by couples. And it's more than reasonable for them to be in a 3-bed apartment.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Vigaris, sorry. Mr. Stradwick.
Okay, no problem.
2 more questions. Question 1. If the community feels you've got the balance between trees and building height wrong, flexibility in the plan to increase the footprint and lower the building height?
Well, I think if we were to increase the footprints, that a lot more trees would
I understand,
go.
but is there the flexibility in the process for that to happen?
Well, that's the flexibility in the process would be through a DA, I suppose. But I think, as I said before, we feel like if we're fattening out those floor plates, we're going to take out not only small trees, but we're going to impact large trees that have existed on the site for a long time.
Yeah.
And they're an asset to the heritage. And I kind of feel like that's probably a bigger issue in many ways than having a building that might be a story higher than what the community may think is acceptable.
And that's the value you want it to come to that balance. I'm just asking if the community has.
Look, I'm sure they will, and you'll hear from them about that. But as I said, we've been through this process for the last 3 years, and just recently we've provided a recent amendment to council to bring the buildings, there's 2 buildings at front Barron's Crescent. They were originally 7 metres from the street frontage. As a result of the discussion that we had with the community and the council 3 or 4 months ago now, it was pretty clear that they were concerned. There wasn't a lot of talk, to be honest, around the buildings in the middle, the higher buildings. There was a lot of talk about the 2, 3 to 4 story buildings fronting Barron's Crescent. And we took the opportunity then of investigating, well, could we pull those buildings back slightly from the street and increase that street frontage to 10 metres without shuffling the building footprints to a point that we were going to take out a fig or take out major trees, and we're able to do that.
Yeah.
So in response to the matter around sort of flexibility, we feel like we've exercised that in incremental parts along this journey today.
Final question is it a possibility that the site becomes so deteriorated and given the housing crisis and the value of the land, if it's not dedicated under an SP2, Montefiore sells it, does it become more valuable as a?
Everything I've heard is no, that's their intention. They've operated on the site for 85 years. They want to operate it on for another 85. Rob can answer that question. I think that's your answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Quinn.
Sorry, I should have asked this before as well. So going back to the point of the, of this concern about the building height, particularly of the central two buildings, the 24-metre ones. In your view, is the whole proposal still viable if those two central buildings were to be brought down further to, say, for example, the 16 to 18 height that's on the more peripheral buildings?
I don't know whether they're viable or not. That's what's proposed as a part of this proposal. We clearly have to do work and work out to what extent that would affect viability or feasibility. But as I've mentioned, we feel like we have the balance right. We've gone through the journey of the general arrangements and the height of the buildings, and we're very happy to work with the community at a DA level, and indeed through this process. But these arrangements that we've proposed are based on sound planning, and it's not Urbis saying that, it's your own officers and consultants that have been engaged by the officers as well. So we feel like we've come to a landing on that.
Councillor Williams.
Just following on from Councillor Quinn's briefed as to why it has to be this number of apartments of that size. It seems to be driving the issue of saving trees, but if you have less apartments, you don't need to be able to survey and every tree. So I'm just wondering, what is the driver that needs to impact? Other scenarios where
Look, it's
less development, it must have done some analysis, right?
it's simply demand. The project we're working on over at Randwick, and I know there's lots of comparisons and unfair comparisons will be made about the Randwick proposal shortly, but in a different context. But there's a significant demand for this product in many areas across Sydney, and this is one of them. And that is fueling the shape and the density of this particular project.
Sorry, Councillor Preston.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I won't go into it, but obviously the report proposes that the site has strategic merit, but I just wanted to talk about one concern that's been risen by the community and that I'm frankly concerned with is the public benefit aspect, as in the benefit to our community of Hunters Hill, given that it's not specific to Hunters Hill residents, it's a broader asset. It says that there might be a cafe and some more usable green spaces, and that Monty's is exploring the potential for broader community use. Do you have any indication of what that could be, what that could look like, and how our residents could make use of the site?
Well, I'll go back to the original statement around the open space. Montefiore have said that they're very happy to make that accessible to the community and for that to be accessible. and for a cafe offer or whatever it might be to be available. So that's certainly a possibility. Allied health facilities on the site, hydrotherapy pool is something else what they're thinking about. These are sorts of matters that would potentially service not only the residents but also the broader community. Rob, is there other things that you want to?
Yeah, no, the only other thing I would, yeah.
Sorry, Rob, could you come to the lectern?
Yeah, I mean, I think just as a starting point, firstly, it's going to free up a lot of housing in Hunters Hill because a lot of the residents we imagine that will be coming into this new development will be from the Hunters Hill municipality. So I think that's a huge benefit. As Peter said, a cafe, we're just opening a physiotherapy and wellness practice for the community at Randwick. We would consider doing something very similar at Hunters Hill to invite people in for our allied health services. We've got a very large allied health team, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, etc. So that would be accessible by the community as well. So we see lots of opportunities, but again, this is all part of that DA process that we will go through. And just to address some of the other comments, we've had lots of commentary around why do you need 144 apartments and so forth. I just want to reiterate that we haven't determined the final mix, really. We could have more than 144 apartments, we could have less than 144 apartments. As I mentioned, we are looking at potentially more residential aged care places, a dementia-specific village, which will take up space. All we are seeking is the flexibility within the planning controls to optimise the site to best meet the aged care needs of the people that we look after. That's what we're asking.
Councillors, any further questions? If not, thank you to both Rob and Peter. I'll call the third speaker, Ms. Kate Russell. Ms. Russell, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Well, people are mystified. Why are we getting thrown under the bus? Should we move now or should we wait, hope for the best? Some moved, some have moved. Some wait, hopefully. Some wait hopelessly. Clearly, it's not a simple matter of logic. The front page of Council's report puts this proposal under Council's strategic outcome. Neighbourhoods reflect local character, heritage, and create a sense of belonging. Could this be irony? It's certainly mystifying. Mr. Karupas reviewed all the technical reports, including the Urban Design Report, and he noted the disparity between the maximum heights and floor space ratio versus the number of stories and actual gross floor area open up risks for taller, bulkier and heavier massing than is suggested through the master plan. That was open up risks of taller, bulkier and heavier massing than is suggested through the master plan. Oh, the master plan. The powder puff pictures, so rubber, so shadowy, with so much scope for bigger, and yet bigger once the zoning is changed. We've read Mr. Karupa's report, his assessment, which identifies so many risks and problems, but still, in the end, recommends that Council approve the rezoning. It's mystifying. Really, that's all I have to say. I'm mystified.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Could you just stay at the podium, please? Councillor Quinn.
So can I ask from your point of view, and there's significant detail obviously in the reports,
Yes.
and you say you've read them, what would you find acceptable on that site?
Well, I would like to see residential development that is consistent with our local character and heritage. I haven't got a specific formula to say this many meters or that many units, but just something that is much more conducive to our community, that's consistent with our heritage and environment.
Councillors,
Others can
any
make
further
better
questions? If, Councillor Crassoy.
Just a clarification on one of your questions while you're still standing there, but it's actually a question through you, Mr. Mayor.
Mhm.
After tonight, whichever way the decision goes, is council approving the rezoning of the site as?
No, councillor, it's not. It's beginning the process, the gateway process, but I'll let Mr. Crepus answer the question in more detail.
Thank you. Thank you. Through you, Mayor. As the Mayor said, no, we're not approving the rezoning. We're just commencing the process for it to go to the Department of Planning, which is called the gateway process, to start the overall consultation and work through the master plan and fine tune the LEP, the future LEP, and the DCP. So when you're starting the process in accordance with this recommendation within the report.
And I will just say, councillor, that is detailed in on page 2, part D, part 1, 2, and 3. Note the following public exhibition of the planning proposal and site-specific development control plan will be reported back to council detailing the outcome of the public exhibition period, at which time council may resolve: 1, to proceed with the recommended recommendations in this report; 2, to proceed with amended controls in the planning proposal and development control plan to that which is exhibited based on community feedback after the consultation process; or 3, to not proceed with the planning proposal and development control plan. Sorry.
Can I
Mr.
just
Crepus.
add through you, Mayor, just to add that the Minister for Planning formally approves the rezoning. Council makes recommendations and assists with the planning proposal, and that's how it formally works. And not forgetting that we're not approving any DA tonight either. You're just considering the going forward with a proposal, a planning proposal, nothing more, nothing less, in accordance with the resolution recommendation.
Councillor, sorry.
Thank you.
Councillor
So
Cresswell.
just understand that this process this evening, not only not to approve the rezoning, it's not even to recommend. What we're discussing tonight is moving to the gateway process of consultation around a proposal to rezone. I just, from your last sentence there, I just wanted to be sure you understand what we're
I think I understand.
So
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Is there any other questions, councillors? Not, thanks. Thank you, Mrs. Russell. Our fourth speaker is Richard Sleeman, which is a statement that's going to be read out by the General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors and members in the gallery, this is a statement that I'll be reading from Mr. Richard Sleeman. Dear Mayor, Councillors, General Manager, Hunters Hill Council, I have been an aged care resident at Montefiore, Hunters Hill for more than 4 years. I am terminally ill with motor neuron disease, which has robbed me of my speech. So I hope you consider this written submission. Planned redevelopment here will severely disrupt the lives of 350 aged care residents. About half of these elderly are very vulnerable folk who will lose their homes. Others like me will have to live out of their dying days among 2 years of dirty, dusty, noisy construction in our wheelchairs and on walkers on the adjoining access roads, have to dodge large, heavy construction vehicles. Between us, we've contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions actually, to be here. I believe it's only fair we and our families are consulted before the council rubber stamps any plan. We residents have more more than enough skin in the game, and I urge council and Montefiore managers to seek our views before proceeding. Montefiore management have not done so. I found out by chance from a neighbour only last week. My concerns were answered promptly and warmly by the Montefiore CEO, and I appreciate that. But I'm just one of 350, and I can't speak for all of them. But my fears remain. I urge you to please talk to us, tell us what's planned, listen to us before you agree to turn any side. Yours sincerely, Richard Sleeman.
Thank you, General Manager. Our fifth speaker is Mr. Bob Hayes. Thank you, Bob. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to start out by saying the Montefiore Redevelopment Community Action Group is not anti-Montefiore. We're not against Montefiore. We are also not against Montefiore performing a redevelopment. We recognise that that's your right to do so. I just want to clarify that we are not the Montefiore Action Group or even the Montefiore Redevelopment Action Group. There are aspects of the redevelopment that we are concerned about, very concerned about. I should have said at the start that I'm Bob Hayes. I'm president of the Montefiore Redevelopment Community Action Association. Tonight, council will make a major decision whether to send or not send the Montefiore planning proposal for gateway determination. The council report by Mr. Karipas recommends that council does forward the planning proposal to DPE seeking gateway determination. However, this recommendation is inconsistent with the body of his otherwise commendable report, which exposes fundamental issues and lists 15 significant deficiencies, some of them major, which mean that the planning proposal fails to meet essential DPE requirements and should not go to gateway. Our association also believes it should not. A gateway determination seeks to review whether the planning proposal has both strategic and site-specific merit. Firstly, to demonstrate strategic merit, the proposal must align with the New South Wales Strategic Planning Framework and government priority. Mr. Karipas says it generally does. However, page 14 of Mr. Karipas's report states under the title strategic merit, and I'll quote, however, several relevant strategic planning strategies seek the provision of housing that is more diverse and affordable. It is unclear that this intent will be satisfied by the planning proposal. The community needs assessment provides no analysis to support an assessment of this issue. Further, and again I quote, the CNA report should have, but did not, set out to establish the following points to demonstrate the merit of the planning proposal. Firstly, that the dwelling mix proposed by the planning proposal will meet the demand for housing that is more diverse and affordable. Secondly, that there is an oversupply of residential aged care facilities in the LGA to the extent that a reduction in supply at the site, Montefiore site, by 40% would be possible without social impact. In short,
Sorry, Mr. Hayes, moved to extension of time. Councillor Quinn, seconded Councillor Crassoy. All those in favour, against, please continue, Mr. Hayes.
In short, the council's own report shows that the planning proposal fails to demonstrate strategic merit. Secondly, the planning proposal must also demonstrate site-specific merit. It must identify potential environmental, social and economic impacts and justify proposed mitigation measures. That's page 73 of the guidelines. However, council's report states under site-specific merit, and I quote, few aspects of social impact have been considered by the planning proposal. Consequently, the planning proposal is unable to demonstrate that the proposal has merit, nor that potential social impacts can be readily addressed during the subsequent LEP making stages. The guidelines state, and I'll quote, For a planning proposal to proceed through gateway determination, the minister or delegate must be satisfied that the proposal has strategic and site-specific merit and that identified potential impacts can be readily addressed during the subsequent LEP making stages. That's page 72 of the guidelines. This planning proposal therefore fails to demonstrate either strategic merit or site-specific merit, and its impact analysis is inadequate. The minister would therefore not be satisfied. In the event of planning panel review, the guidelines state, quote, proposals that do not reasonably meet the strategic and site-specific merit assessment criteria are unlikely to proceed, unquote. That's page 35 of the guidelines. My third point is the council report goes on to detail the 15 areas of deficiency, including community consultation, social infrastructure needs, council service needs, concept design, risk of post-rezoning growth in scale, and various inadequacies of the site-specific DCP. To rectify these deficiencies requires very significant work. This should be done now, not after the proposal has gone to Gateway, where it will just complicate the process. My fourth point is the proposal fails to meet the fundamental requirement of the Hunters Hill LEP to protect and maintain the character, integrity, and amenity of the local area. The LEP is legislation, it's law. But this proposal is blatantly non-compliant. In addition, the council's reports required strategic outcomes, as you already heard, that neighbourhoods reflect local character will not be achieved. Fifth point, substantial community research concluded that SP2 infrastructure zoning is inappropriate.
Sorry, Mr. Hayes, moved extension of time, Councillor Williams, second Councillor Preston. All those in favour, against, that is carried.
Thank you. Substantial community research concluded that SP2 infrastructure zoning is inappropriate for the Montefiore site. A residential zoning is appropriate. The Montefiore site has had residential zoning for many years. Its ongoing use as a residential aged care facility and proposed residential seniors housing reflects continued and continuous residential site use. Finally, this planning proposal, if successful, risks changing the face of Hunters Hill by setting a strong precedent for high-rise development across the municipality. In conclusion, the planning proposal's inability to demonstrate required strategic and site-specific merit, inadequate impact analysis, and the multiple deficiencies documented in the council's report is a showstopper. These show that the planning proposal is not fit to be recommended for gateway determination. A recommendation to proceed doesn't make sense. Our recommendation is that council rejects the current Montefiore planning proposal and it invites Montefiore to resubmit an alternative proposal consistent with a residential site zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You said there were 15 deficiencies. You were fairly comprehensive. I didn't actually count them all. Are there any others you'd like to elaborate in any way?
Sorry, can you speak up? I can't.
Sorry, Bob. You said there were 15 deficiencies.
That's what I've counted, yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't able to count as you went through. Are there any other things that would like to emphasise in terms of deficiency?
Sorry, were there any other things?
Are there any other matters you would like to speak on that you haven't included in that 15?
Look, one thing I would like to touch on is the SP2 zoning. The person that did most of the research on that, not all, but most of it, unfortunately is out of Sydney at the moment. Otherwise, they would have been here. But what I was told by them and others in our group was that I think there are 7 other sites in Sydney which have a a SP2 zoning apply. However, in all those cases, this is where there's some aged care facilities on those sites. However, in all cases, it wasn't a residential site which has been rezoned as SP2 infrastructure. It was sites which were infrastructure in the first place, such as former schools, etc., clubs. And so the aged care facilities were built on those sites which were already SP2 infrastructure. The thing about SP2 infrastructure, as I understand it, is that compared with residential zoning, it allows less restrictions on things like building heights and floor space ratios. So it is in Montefiore's interest to apply for SP2 infrastructure rather than one of the residential zonings. But there's a very, very strong case why a residential zoning is the appropriate zoning for the Montefiore site.
Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Quinn.
Yes, just in terms of the building height issue. So, you know, we're all aware of the 3 heights that are proposed in this, 4 heights that are proposed in this proposal. Is there a view amongst those that you represent of what would be the absolute maximum you would allow on that whole site? Conscious that, you know, Montefiore does, if they are going to do something there, there's got to be some economic return, you know, to trigger it, to enable it all to happen. Is there any figure in mind, height-wise, that your group would find palatable?
Look, I think what I would say is we've thought very carefully about our recommendation. We believe that Montefiore should resubmit an alternative proposal consistent with a residential site zoning. Now, you know, pretty obviously, I think R3 is one of the residential site zonings, which could be an option. Certainly, my understanding is that the SP2 allows more than that, and that's what's unacceptable to us. But I think our view could be described as we would be willing to sit down with Montefiore and negotiate a suitable residential zoning, but to go to the SP2 infrastructure we think is clearly inappropriate. And you know, the building heights that are currently proposed, I guess they're pretty good along Gaza Avenue, 2 stories. Not many people can complain about that. But then you get into Barron's Crescent, and it's 16 metres on the corner of Gaza Avenue and Barron's Crescent. It's not really clear in the report, but it's still 18 metres in Barron's Crescent, south of Thorn Street. Just to pick up on the point about how many stories there are, the reason it's been mentioned that up to 8 stories has been mentioned by some people. The reason for that is because with 26 metres, it is possible to build 8 stories. And at the moment, you know, we've got a master plan, which is a thought bubble, a gleam in the eye or a concept, and there are not definite proposals. So once a zoning such as infrastructure zoning was completed, it could be open slather for a developer or an organisation then to seek more than they're initially talking about in the first proposals. So yeah, you know, I guess we've got a situation where in Barron's Crescent we've got a 16 metre building and an 18 metre building just south of the synagogue. 18 metres, at that point the topography is that the ground is relatively high. I'd say it's probably elevated by 2 or 3 metres at the level of the synagogue above the road. The houses over the other side of the road, by contrast, are below the road. My house, which happens to be right opposite, is probably a good 4 metres, if not more, below the road level. So a 4-storey building is going to look like at least a 6-storey building from where I sit. It's not just overshadowing, it's things like lights on at night. And even though I acknowledge that the setback has been increased by 3 metres, but you know, what's 3 metres? 3 metres is from here to the end of the table at the end of the day. And the total setback is 13 metres, which is, I don't know, probably less than the length of this room. So we're not talking about setback really being a panacea for the impacts. And the bottom line is that there's an LEP that says you have to meet the character and identity and amenity of the existing area. And we want that LEP is law, and we want that law applied.
Councillors, any further questions of Mr Hayes? Councillor Vergara.
The 15 discrepancies that you referred to, and you referred to page 14 of this report, that is the view of the expert reviewer in relation to community needs assessment.
Those deficiencies were the deficiencies that I identified in the entire body of Steve Grievous' report.
And so the thing that you read on page 14 is an extract from the reviewer's report.
Yep.
And that report concludes, in respect of all of the issues it identified, that they recommend that gateway determination require that the issues be examined prior to public exhibition. So even identifying the issues as they have, they don't suggest the proposal shouldn't be put forward. They say they can be addressed at gateway determination prior to public exhibition.
Right.
So that's the review of
that's what I don't understand.
Okay, but you accept that that's what that they ultimately show that each occasion.
I accept that's what the report says, but to me, that conclusion, that recommendation, is at odds with much of the content of the body of the report. And the bottom line is that the guidelines, the DPE LEP making guidelines are absolutely black and white clear. And I think I said it about 3 times in here, that the rule is that you must have strategic merit proven and site-specific merit proven and a satisfactory impact analysis. And if you don't, then the minister doesn't want to know about it and they won't approve it, and a planning panel won't approve it either. That's why I can't understand why a recommendation to proceed can flow from the council's own report, which lists many things which are not up to scratch.
Yeah, but perhaps that's the answer, that it can be addressed at a later stage. And then my second question is, the Hunters Hill LEP identifies one of the objects of an SP2 infrastructure zoning to be the facilitation of development that is in keeping with the special characteristics of the site or its existing special use. We've heard the Urbis people say the intention is of the SP2 zone proposal to protect it as a seniors housing facility for the long term. So do you accept, given the statement in the LEP about the objects of an SP2, that intention is consistent with the object of the state?
No, I don't accept that, because when you look at the definition of infrastructure, it includes all sorts of stuff, you know, sewer facilities, jails, schools. It does not include aged care, seniors housing.
Seniors housing can be a development in land that's zoned SP2.
Well, as I say, the precedents in Sydney are only where that land was already zoned SP2 for other reasons.
And the final question is, mentioned that they're wishy-washy, the heights are not sure. The Urbis comment was that combined with some controls, the way they all work together, that the controls will limit, I'm quoting, will limit the developments to 3 stories and 4 stories. 3 stories with a 10 metre and the 4 stories with a 13. Do you accept that the way the controls will work together will apply some more rigor to the building heights?
Look, obviously, if you step a building, that helps, but it doesn't solve the basic problem that the thing is too high and out of character with the local neighbourhood, which is contrary to the LEP, which is legislation. As I said, 3 metres is about the length of that table. It's not a big deal. It helps, but it doesn't solve the problem.
I'm not sure that answer, but it's okay.
Councillors, any other questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Hayes. Thank you very much.
If you don't mind, I'd like to table my.
You may. Thank you. I'll now call speaker number 6, Mrs. Karen Raisin. Raisin, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm both president of Huddersfield Trust and a resident of Barron's Crescent. Councillors, I think you know it's wrong. A concocted planning proposal by Urbis on behalf of Montefiore seeking an SP2 infrastructure rezoning with a bracketed seniors housing after it. Now, if you Google it, you won't find it. I've gone and looked up SEP housing, seniors housing policy. It seemingly just does not exist. It's not a sewage works, it's not an airport, a railway station. So I think if you're into property development, it is a bit of a gift. Respectfully tonight, I'm going to try just one more time, because I have written to council several times about why this proposal should be rejected, and that a much fairer and more reasonable outcome for the community and residents of Huddersfield would be to rezone Montefiore in a medium density type zoning. I'm not an expert on this, but this infrastructure is contrived. It really is. It seems that under this council, even our local environmental plan, which seeks to protect and enhance our unique character, amenity, environmental and heritage values, is being ignored. I'd like to know, where is the public benefit in all of this? There's no voluntary planning agreement in sight, and council will not get one additional ratepayer out of building 144 1, 2 and 3 bedroom units, and I understand 40% will be 3 bedrooms. It doesn't sound like normal seniors housing to me. However, someone somewhere, I think, will be gaining from all this. More importantly, I think, did no one seek to ask where you can find Montefiore's environmental impact statement? There isn't one. And it's obvious that there should be. This is a precious bushland setting. The site is surrounded by conservation protected areas, heritage listed Boronia Park, the Great North Walk, regionally significant as a wildlife corridor. It's difficult to justify a redevelopment of a site only metres away from threatened and locally significant species like the powerful owl, the grey-headed flying fox, the short-beaked echidna, which I've told you about before. They're all listed on council's website. Many other nocturnal animals that hunt by night may now die out due to the creation of a mini city, because that's what it's looking like to someone like me. It's going to be lit by night, and it's going to operate 24/7, and it's going to have a lot more people moving into my street. So it's going to have an impact. There's no question about it. And everywhere I walk this street, it's a quiet cul-de-sac, it's bush surrounded, and everywhere a wildlife protection.
Sorry,
area
Ms. Raisin, sorry. Moved Councillor Williams, extension of time, seconded Councillor Sanderson. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Please continue.
Yeah. There are councils got wildlife protection area zones everywhere, signs up everywhere, to the Great North Walk, directly opposite. I just don't get it. And yet nobody's submitted, that I can find, an environmental impact statement on what this redevelopment will mean. It's changing its business model, there's no doubt. We know property management makes more money than aged care beds, yet aged care beds is a long-term growth area, and that's according to Census 2021 data. Council, for some reason, accepted data from the 2016 census material and didn't seek to have it updated when the report was handed in May 2021. The data had been available in 2023, I should say. This submission is clearly an improper basis for assessment of aged care needs in our municipality, and I think you would agree with that. It's just too old, and I assume it must fit the purpose or the argument better to use that old 2016 stuff. The irony is the council's own report does identify many deficiencies in the planning proposal, and I won't go through them all, but there's concern in terms of the increase in building heights. We know this, particularly when it's surrounded by low density, 8.5 metre heights, so going up to 24 is going to be quite a shock to the skyline. And we all have to live there, and it's about livability. Page 13, a net increase in bedroom numbers across the site of around 50%. And that's in conflict with the densities described in the urban design report. And that then makes bushfire protection inadequate. Has anyone picked up on that? Yes, in the report, Mr. Karepas did. Site-specific merit, the report states unable to demonstrate that the proposal has merit, nor the potential social impacts can be readily addressed during the subsequent LEP making stages. Further, the applicant has not adequately consulted with the local community. Well, I agree with that. And yet, notwithstanding all this lack of information or research or compliance or things being overlooked, it was deemed adequate, only adequate to progress to Gateway, even though it is quite deficient. Council has been dealing with Montefiore on and off since 2021, to my knowledge, but this evening we've learnt the last 3 years, so that's 2020. So there's been really plenty of time to get things right. And yet, here we are. We have a grossly deficient response on Montefiore by council's experts, a deficient proposal. It's an absolute trial, quite frankly. And where is the merit? Can any of you tell me about the merit of this proposal for the community and the residents of Hunters Hill?
Sorry, Mrs. Rosen, moved an
I'm
extension of
almost
time, moved councillor Williams, seconded councillor Priest, and all those in favour, against, that is carried. Please continue.
And what if it fails? It's not backed by Gateway for the same reasons that we've been raising with you and by the local planning panel as well. I mean, how will that look for council? I think it's just plain wrong. I think many of you know it is. It should be rejected outright. And tonight, I really, at the very least, I'd be asking before you vote, you know, why isn't there an environmental impact statement? Because of the area that the site is located in. It's very precious. I've personally been a homeowner for 33 years in Barons Crescent, and I cannot believe Hunters Hill Council no longer cares for the environment or the public benefit. And just a footnote about 2 Garza Avenue, there's somebody, a homeowner, that has refused to sell, and I think that they actually have a right to age in place and in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rosen. If you could just stay there for a moment. Questions, councillors? Councillor Quinn.
The question actually to Mr. Karepas. So in regards to the EIS, my understanding is that the EIS would be part of a DA submission, not at the Gateway stage. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor. EIS is a document it's pretty detailed, and this proposal does not trigger an EIS. And at the DA stage, a statement of environmental effects will be triggered, and other associated reports such as traffic, design, all that sort of stuff. So the short answer is that this proposal, this plan proposal, does not trigger EIS. EIS is triggered by larger type, different type developments, such as the marina proposal with us at the moment, a jail or a hospital. So this does not trigger. At the DA stage, which we're not there yet, will require a statement of environmental effects and all the other reports. Now, with the plan proposal in the papers, you'll see that site and surrounding context reports have been provided, such as the topography, stormwater, flooding, flora, fauna, bushfire, access and movement, traffic access, a variety of reports. So the detailed reports there.
Thank you, councillors. Any other questions? Councillor Prieston.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Karen. I just wanted to know, and I'll reiterate the question posed by Councillor Quinn to another speaker earlier. If the proponent was to hypothetically resubmit a new proposal, what would you deem satisfactory
Okay.
in terms of redevelopment?
I'm going to say 33 years, everybody's lived in harmony and been very respectful. You know, my little girl, when she was even in preschool, would go to Montefiore, you know, as part of the excursions and things like that. But this is just over the top. I mean, it shows no respect, and particularly to our own LEP. You know, we've got to have something to believe in, council, and you're just abandoning, I feel, us. I think that there can be a happy medium. For me personally, when I go walking past Montefiore, some of the places, particularly on the Boronia Park North side, which leads you to High Street, that pathway, they're like 3 stories. For some reason, they've built up really high, and even the ground's incredibly built up. So I don't know why that is and how that was allowed last time. But given that some of what they're going to be pulling down already technically fits 3 stories, I reckon 4 should be the max, quite frankly. I think we could probably live with 3-story, 2-story, 3-story. 4 would be the absolute max, but I'm not an expert. And if it's starting from the base there, I wouldn't want 4. I'd only want 3, literally. But a proper 3. I mean, this one's exaggerated. You've got all this area underneath, I don't know why, and then you've got the stuff on top.
And to be clear, you completely reject the idea of the rezoning.
I do. I think it's.
Would you be satisfied with the rezoning provided?
I don't know why.
Right,
Nobody can give me an example. What is the infrastructure that Montefiore is putting in? To my knowledge, they're putting in housing for older age people. What is the infrastructure? If someone can perhaps explain that to me, I don't know.
Sorry, Mr. Rosen, if you could direct your
You know, I don't
questions to the chair.
understand why the zoning change in my research and people I've spoken to, and again, it's like what Mr. Hayes said earlier, is that they've already started off as an infrastructure. I looked it up on our maps and could see that it was every school in our LGA and the sewage works, which are in Barron's Crescent on the corner of Thorn Street, and the horse paddock. This is just totally out of context. And I feel like there's something tricky going on. I really do. And I don't know about it yet, but I bet I find out about it later on.
So perhaps in response to that, could I please ask Mr. Mayor a question to the Director of Planning?
Yes, you may.
In relation to Karen's question about why the rezoning.
Through you, Mayor, I think the proponent mentioned something about that earlier. They've applied the application to us. We have to consider it. So it goes back to the proponent why they applied for a rezoning for a planning proposal, and I think they, from memory, we can ask them again. I think they said to give certainty to ensure that. It's not a pseudo residential flat building, but there's certainty that they continue with the type of housing that they've got to continue the 85 years, a further 85 years, if I've got that right.
And in your experience, would it be because of those allied services, or is it something to that effect that is like, is that sort of facility only provided for in the rezoning, or could you have allied services like a sauna?
Sorry, Ms. Rosen. Sorry, Ms. Rosen. The councillor's asking questions of the staff.
In response to my question about what kind of public.
Sorry, Councillor Prieston, could you, could you direct your questions through the chair to the staff?
Yes. Yeah. In response to a question that I asked to the Urbis speaker about public benefit, they suggested that there could be some additional facilities at the proposed site that might be available for public use to the community, such as, I can't remember the exact word, sauna, pool, health services. Would you need a rezoning to offer those services and construct that infrastructure at the site?
Through you, Mayor, I think that's ancillary to the current use and purpose, so you would not have to lodge a rezoning and be part of their development application process, and they'll be considered then. Public benefits happen later on with regard to further with the plan proposal and the DA process.
Thank you, councillors. Any other questions of Mr. Rosen? If not, thank you, Mr. Rosen. I'll now call our seventh speaker, Dr. Alastair Sharp. Thank you, Dr. Sharp. You have 3 minutes.
I don't understand how council can even consider sending the current planning proposal to the DPE when the report before you tonight identifies so many deficiencies. I'll comment on just 3 of them. First one is the claim, the need to provide diversity in housing and ageing in place, which is given as the justification for this work. In the second paragraph of the council, Mr. Karipas bases his recommendation on the local strategic planning statement of council, which states the proposed changes enacted by the planning proposal seek to assist in implementing the relevant priorities and actions of the LSPS to meet the needs of an ageing population through the provision of additional diversity in housing. I don't see any diversity in housing in this proposal. Searching for the LSPS for references to ageing population and diversity in housing, I find this strategic document proposes not just additional housing, but housing, this is what it should be providing, housing that helps an ageing population manage chronic disease, housing that caters for an ageing population with a disability, housing for those with a range of income levels. I don't think the proposal addresses any of those aims from the ASPS. Looking for more information about the Montefiore organisation, I found on the internet their annual information statement of 2022, which shows a comprehensive income deficit of $16 million. In other words, 14% of their gross income. So I think we can understand the aim of the planning proposal is to generate greater income for this worthy charity. But we should reject it because it fails to meet many of the requirements of Council's strategic planning statement. The planning proposal states that this proposal will reduce the number of more vulnerable aged beds within areas impacted by asset protection zones by replacing these with independent living units. That doesn't sound like increasing the number of beds for aged care people. I'd like to comment on the possible removal of the Cyril Rosenbaum Synagogue. Surprisingly, the planning proposal indicates that the retention or removal of the synagogue will have no impact on the primary significance of the site. Proposing this council's consultant states that the heritage significance assessment undervalues the importance of the synagogue. Retention of the synagogue is supported. This is council's consultant.
Sorry, Dr. Sharp. Moves Councillor Sanderson's extension of time. Seconded Councillor Quinn. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. Please continue.
Thank you. This should come as no surprise since the proponent is a Jewish charity and there are no other synagogues in the vicinity of Hunters Hill. Surely loss of the Montefiore synagogue would inconvenience many of the current and future aging residents. And finally, I'd like to talk about environmental impact. The Montefiore site adjoins Baronia Park. Yet there appears to have been no analysis of the probable and possible effects of the proposed development on the plants and animals of this nature reserve. Not only during construction, but also into the future, light and sound emitted by 6-storey buildings are quite likely to impact on the birds and other animals who live in or visit Baronia Park. And this is a serious deficiency. The proposal also relies heavily on the heritage value of the existing garden, but the shadow diagrams clearly show winter overshadowing of the garden. In fact, the Urbis document shows that building D of probably 6 stories is located directly to the north of the garden, separated only by the width of a path. In winter, this would rob much of the garden of sunlight for much of the day. As noted, the shadowing of the proposed building has the potential to impact on the site's existing trees and significant landscape spaces, including the northern end of the heritage garden. In addition, I'm quoting from the consultant's report. In addition, shadowing may potentially impact the growth and development of new landscaping. Further impact on the garden would come from the proposed high street entry to the basement car park. And finally, the consultants have identified the presence of a blast-proof World War II communications bunker, something which was secret for right through the war and for a long time afterwards, I understand. This is inside the garden, behind the Gaza Street houses. I think the proponents should document this historic remnant and consider making access to it available to the public. Summing up, Council's own consultants have identified many deficiencies in this planning proposal. And should you agree to submit it to DPE for gateway determination, you should tackle the many problems identified in Mr. Karikas' report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharp. Councillors, any questions of Dr. Sharp? If not, thank you, Dr. Sharp.
Thank you.
I now move to our last speaker, Mrs. Heather Armstrong. I note that your application came in after time, by about 45 minutes, but I've used discretion to allow you to speak. So
Thank you. Thank you very
welcome
much.
to the chamber. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors. This planning proposal raises three fundamental questions. Will council support a planning proposal for an ineligible zone to be granted Montefiore? Number one. Number two, will council allow the interests of Montefiore to take precedence on the welfare, quality of life of its residents? Number two. And that number two, I include the residents of Montefiore home in the light of Ms. Roberts Lehman's letter, which was read out. Number three, why is council ignoring the requirements and aims of council's plans for development control, including Hunters Hill Local Environmental Plan 2012, the Development Control Plan, and the Local Strategic Planning Statement of March 2020? The attempt by council to characterise what is residential housing as infrastructure is confounding. The recent suggestion that Montefiore is a health services facility is unsupportable.
Sorry, Mrs. Armstrong, just to clarify, council is not qualifying that. The application is made by Montefiore, not by council.
Certainly, I understand that.
Yes, you qualified that as Hunters Hill Council is doing that. That's the proposal, gateway proposal by Montefiore to rezone.
The language I used was, would council support a planning proposal? And would it allow the interests of Montefiore to take precedence? I'm not suggesting that council is moving.
No, thank you. I just wanted to clarify. Yes, thank you.
Private spot rezoning by Montefiore, which is not council's.
Yes, by Montefiore. Yes.
I understand that.
Thank you.
I've
Please continue.
said to the contrary, I'm sorry. So the attempt by council to characterise what is residential housing as infrastructure is confounding. The recent suggestion that Montefiore is a health services facility is unsupportable. It houses people who are living in supported housing because of frailty, not illness. And the definition of health services facility in SP2 transport, SEP transport infrastructure does not include this kind of residential housing. So it can't be squeezed into SEP infrastructure on that basis. The attempt to characterise this planning proposal as infrastructure is inconsistent with multiple local and state government documents. And the Department of Planning and Environment might be entertained by this council's creative attempt, or Montefiore's creative attempt, to call this residential site infrastructure on the basis that it is a health facility similar to a hospital. That is clearly not what the department's seniors housing design guide envisages, or what is allowed by SEP transport and infrastructure.
The Seniors Housing Guide is a detailed document published November 2022. Goes through what seniors housing is. It includes residential care facilities, which are known as, among other identifiers, as a residential aged care facility, residential care, residential aged care, nursing home or care home, and is a place where residents are provided with full-time care and assistance with daily life. These residents are typically frail and have high care needs, often including advanced progressive dementia. Seniors housing also included apartments or villas for older people who are able to continue to live independently and age in place. Residents are often focused on their health, well-being and socialisation, and typically seek out like-minded communities.
Sorry, Mrs. Armstrong, moved extension of time. Councillor Williams seconded, Councillor Quinn. All those in favour? Against? That is carried.
Thank you. That was a quote from the Seniors Housing Design Guide. End of quote. So we have a whole series of statements in our local planning controls which echo the same basic aim. The LEP, clause 1.22a, to maintain and enhance the character and identity of established neighbourhoods in Hunters Hill by regulating the use and development of land. Development control plan. Character is noted by the aims of the instrument and is also specified by zone objectives, together with a number of local provisions which must be considered before development consent. I know this is a plan proposal, but nonetheless down the track may be granted. B, this plan has the following strategic objectives: to maintain and enhance the character and identity of established neighbourhoods in Hunters Hill. The LEP is very specific on the issue of height. 3.4.2, height. Objectives. Objectives in relation to the height of multi-unit residential developments are: A, avoid adverse impact upon an existing residential area which result from excessive height, scale or bulk. B, ensure that proposed buildings are compatible with height, scale and bulk of the locality's existing and design characters. C, maintain and enhance the domestic scale, form and variety which are characteristic of the surrounding residential area. D, ensure that new developments minimise adverse visual impacts, the obstruction of views and loss of privacy or sunlight to existing residential development. Now that's LEP, which of course the council must observe. That's at the DA stage. This is a planning proposal, but this is nonetheless the kind of thing council must envisage as a problem if it goes ahead with an SP2 infrastructure zone, which completely trashes these controls. The local strategic planning statement of March 2022, the same sorts of statements. Also, I need to focus on housing and landscape design to ensure the character is retained and appropriate development takes place, which is the purpose of the local strategic planning statement and North District Plan. Two types of character statements, this is a quote. Prepared as actions of the LSPS, 1, conservation areas, 2, local character statement for lands, character statement to give guidance to development proposals on how they can best fit with the established character and make applications to council and in turn achieve the aims of the North District Plan. So we have this completely anomalous, very strange application for 26 metres beside 8.5, which is the maximum you can go to under R2. Completely out of character, it trashes the local law, legally controlled planning legally established planning controls, and is a bizarre overextension, overreach for purposes other than benefit of this community, our community. So it's been noted that Mr. Grievous' report has rejected that the site and strategic planning merit have been demonstrated. He's pushed that through to the gateway.
Sorry, Mrs. Armstrong, move extension of time. Councillor Williams seconded. Councillor Sanderson, all those in favour? Against? That is carried. Please continue. Sorry.
Okay. So we don't have adequate justification at this stage for such a huge change in use and building type, which is a gross intrusion into an existing low density residential zone, which is the entirety of Boronia Park, other than the Pittwater Road sites for the shops and for the up near the fire station where there's some increased density, increased heights. One thing that's been overlooked as I've found out going through these documents is that this is not a standard planning proposal because of the huge change in character which is proposed. It's a complex planning proposal. It changes the whole time frame. Changes local character and is inconsistent with council's local strategic planning statement. So it's not a standard planning proposal, but a complex one. New South Wales Government's LEP making guideline of August 2023 allows 120 days for assessment of a complex planning proposal, not the 95 days allowed for a standard one, which has been the big pressure. We've got 95 days, got to get this through to the gateway, or Montefiore will take it through themselves. We've got 120 days. So we have 25 more days to consider this decision, and we do not have any immediate time pressure. Conclusion. The following are the principles Council should adopt when rejecting this planning proposal at this stage and requiring more support to satisfy both site and strategic merit before it goes through to the gateway. Number one, any development of seniors housing in Hunters Hill should comply with the applicable SEP, which is SEP housing. Since the usage is residential, SEP housing is the relevant SEP. Number two, there is no zone called SP2 seniors housing in SEP transport and infrastructure or anywhere else in current legislation. Subzones are not permitted. Number three, existing seniors housing on SP2 land, which was previously zoned SP1 or SP2, are historical anomalies. Those exceptions do not demonstrate a general proposition that a residential zone can be changed to purpose 2 zone to build housing. Under New South Wales law, housing comes within SEP housing and cannot be characterised as infrastructure. You will look in vain through the entire SEP transport and infrastructure to find anything that allows this rezoning. Amend that statement to say that where there is existing infrastructure, SP2, already zoned, because of the state government's moves to free up land availability for other uses, such as housing, where you have an SP2 zoning because it's a school, for example, then you might be able to apply with consent to add residential housing into that existing SP2 zone because of this increased flexibility. But that doesn't mean you can start from this proposition, which is I've got residential and I'm going to up it to SP.
Sorry, Mrs Armstrong moved extension of time, seconded Councillor Sanderson. All those in favour? Against? That is carried.
Thank you. And you can up it to SP2. That doesn't follow. That's not the case. Where was it? Okay. Number 4, the design principles, height limits and other requirements of SEP housing should be observed, as the New South Wales Government has made abundantly clear in its various documents dealing with housing. Number 5, this plan proposal attempt to create an SP2 infrastructure zone is to avoid the limits of SEP housing, namely the height limits, 9.5 metres plus another 2 metres for the infrastructure on top, the lift well going up. You've got 20% of the roof, which can go up to 11 metres, but basic building must be 9.5 metres under SEP housing, that's it, not 26 metres or any other height increase. So avoiding those height limits, of course, then gives Montefiore this excuse that it is hard to have great flexibility. Frankly, I found those arguments as to shoring up the future availability of this site for housing for seniors rather than residential housing implausible. I can't see the logic in that. If we have a residential rezoning, for example, which is within the bounds of contemplation, then that doesn't mean that somebody, unless Montefiore decides to sell the place, and it seems they don't want to, nothing's going to change. I don't see why you need an SP2 zone, an infrastructure zone, to give you any kind of greater certainty as to the future usage of that site. There's no greater certainty than residential free zone. That's what you've got. You've got residential free zone, which goes higher. So those arguments as to the justification for an SP2 zone I found implausible. If there's any questions, that's my...
Thank you, Mrs Armstrong. Sorry, Councillor Vergara.
Yeah, it's a question through you, Mr Mayor.
Yes.
So the statement that zoning at R3 medium density would limit it to the 8.5, that's wrong, isn't it? Because the SEP housing, section 84, limits the height for land zone residential where residential flat buildings are not permitted. But Hunters Hill LEP allows residential flat buildings in R3 medium. So that restriction in 84 of the SEP wouldn't apply if it was zoned R3 medium density. Is that right?
I'll pass that to Mr. Carappas.
Through you, Mayor, looking at the current height map for LEP, Hunters Hill, you'll see that the residential flat buildings height vary from 8.5 to 11 to 17 metres in height.
Thank you. No, that's fine. Thank you. Councillor Quinn.
Yeah, to follow on that same question. So R3 in Hunters Hill at the moment is maximum 17 metres. Is that what you're saying?
It varies from 8.5, 11 and 17.
17 is the maximum in
Yes.
Hunters Hill LGA at this time.
At this time,
this
but
present moment.
just to be clear, 17 is not the maximum under the SEP. We, as council, can
That's right.
can determine the height of an R3
Yeah,
building.
and that 17
Yes.
would be Glazel Road probably, is it? The Hunters Hill outside.
It would probably be Gladesville opposite the Cow Street car park.
It's,
Oh, yeah, right.
yeah,
Okay.
and it's Salter Street.
Oh, yeah, understood.
Yes.
Agreed.
Sorry, councillors, any other questions of Mrs. Armstrong? If not, thank you, Mrs. Armstrong. Councillor Williams.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move the motion if I may, to
The motion in the report or the alternate motion?
no, it's a motion.
That you-
if like
yep.
to call it that, yeah.
Could we just pull up the motion that councillor Williams sent through earlier? And thank you, councillor Williams, for sending that through with time. We just pull that motion up, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, councillor Williams, would you like to read your motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, might be easier. The motion. The council does not support the Montefiore planning proposal for the reasons set out below. 1, the planning proposal lacks strategic merit and fails to meet site-specific merit and meet the relevant government guidelines and community expectations. 2, the Hunters Hill Planning Panel highlighted inadequate community consultation and reports. These remain significantly unaddressed. The local planning panel does not support sending the planning proposal to gateway determination. The proposed building heights are too high and out of local character. The proposal needs to be far more moderate in scale and meet the standards of the SEP Housing Part 5, housing for seniors and people with disabilities. 4, there are serious impacts on the local area from the current proposal, including significant increase in traffic in an area where council's own Baronia Park local area traffic management plan found key issues, including rat running, traffic speeds, and irresponsible driving, pedestrian safety and parking. The site, 4.2, the site being in an isolated location away from major roads and transport facilities. 4.3, the proposed entry to the underground car park and loading dock in Barons Crescent will have impacts on houses opposite and in the surrounding areas. 4.4, the proposed pedestrian entry near the synagogue is likely to cause parking impacts in Barons Crescent. 5, the unprecedented rezoning of residential land to SP2 (senior housing) will set a serious precedent for the municipality of Hunters Hill and beyond by allowing zoning and heights that are not consistent with the Hunters Hill LEP. 6, residential zoning should be used as 1, the site does not have existing infrastructure of the kind which is contemplated by the SEP infrastructure, nor does the planning proposal or subsequent development envisage that this will change. The existing and proposed use of the site is residential. 6.2, The planning proposal seeks to avoid compliance with the SEP housing by characterising the site and its uses as something which they are not, namely infrastructure. 6.3, the assessment must have regard to the planning principles, including in the SEP housing. 7, the proponent's right to redevelop is acknowledged, but the proposal must recognise the design principles set out in Part 5, Division 6 of the SEP housing, including 7.1, neighbourhood amenity and streetscapes, including current character, heritage and conservation, and visual and acoustic privacy is the second point. 8, the site-specific DCP is inadequate and will not apply if the future development application is a state significant development. 9, council has inadequate information to make a well-informed decision to progress the planning proposal. Council is of the view that the report by the Director of Town Planning highlights numerous issues with the planning proposal where important requirements are either not satisfied or not satisfied to an adequate standard. These issues must be addressed. 10, the planning proposal is not consistent with the requirements of the Hunters Hill Future Transport Strategy 2056, being 10.1, new development should ideally occur on major trunk and transit network. And 10.2, new development should ideally occur in proximity to the local centres and transport hubs in the LGA. 11, consultation with the community has been inadequate and not addressed since Council's 11.1, Council's Resolution 249/22 resolved that Council receive and note the resolutions unanimously passed by the residents at the meeting as listed in the attachment to this report, and 2, resolve that should Council form a view that the proposal has strategic merit, Council hold a community consultation meeting at the Town Hall as soon as practicable and before submissions by Council for the gateway determination. And 11.2, I'm almost to the end, the local planning panel advice, the Council's report states, it is our opinion that the applicant has not adequately consulted the local community. A consideration should ensure that the broader range of community views are sought. 12, the planning proposal fails to meet the requirements which are a central part of the current Hunters Hill LEP. The LEP has a strategic outcome that is not met in the report. Neighbours reflect local character. And 13, the final point, that Council invite Montefiore to resubmit alternative proposals, a proposal consistent with a residential zoning.
We have a second to Councillor Williams. Yes, Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Williams, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Most certainly, Mr. Mayor. I think the motion spells out a lot of the issues very clearly. And the point is, the overall point is that it doesn't have strategic merit, and it's not a merit on site specific basis. In the old days, we used to call this spot rezoning, where an area was rezoned out of character to the surrounding areas. And that was eventually dismissed because it didn't come with community outcomes that people could live with. And here we are in a process now where we're looking to, if this was to go further to Gateway, of a situation where we'll end up with a development or an outcome that's not consistent with what our current LEP objectives are and our community expectations. Now, it's been made reference to the housing strategy, that is one of the drivers behind this process. Sure, the housing strategy does look for increased opportunities in the municipality. And sure, it does mention Montefiore site as being one of those. But surely it comes down to what is appropriate scale and size of development. Sydney's problems can't be solved in one location, particularly a location that is nestled within a residential area abutting very significant bushland. So the housing strategy can't be used, in my view, to drive this process. It can be used to allow development on the site that's appropriate to what the LEP and the community expectations are. The issue of the local planning panel, I think, is an important one. They don't determine it, but they are required to provide a recommendation advice to council. Their advice was that we didn't consult the community adequately and there were deficiencies in the reporting. Now, we can only assume that without the LPP having a chance to review where we've got to, that they still would say that they don't support the recommendation to go forward. It's important to note that there hasn't been any community consultation, and going through all the reports and the many reports, the additional reports, the only one that I see that's not contested is the issue of the heritage. I think that's the only one that does cover the issues. The rest of them we've heard tonight, and if you, which I'm sure everybody has read, you will see that there's issues still outstanding that in my mind makes it imperative the council not proceed forward until it actually has that information available to it. I think the element here tonight, which maybe I'd overlooked, but certainly struck me strongly, is the representation by the resident at the facility. I would have thought in this proposal and this process, they would be key to the future and a key to their own future as to what should be developed on the site, but they don't seem to be included at all or embraced. Public benefits been mentioned. I can't see at this stage that there's any public benefit with a development of that scale. We've heard that the zoning, these SP2 is appropriate, but we've also heard it's not appropriate. There's a range of issues associated with it. And I agree, I've looked at it. Nowhere does it mention housing. It is about infrastructure. And I do note the report from the legal advisor. I also note the information that's been provided by the community. Nowhere is there that I can find or see that you apply special purpose infrastructure, SP2, to an area that's residential. Always where it's been done has been associated with a prior use of infrastructure, church, school, whatever. But to go the other way, I don't see anywhere in the legislation or in the classification an opportunity to do that. There's a whole range of issues, and I'm probably out of 5 minutes, but I'll have a chance to comment and write a reply. But I do thank the residents for their perseverance and attendance tonight. And maybe they were a bit confused by this business of extending time or whatever, but our code of practice requires 3 minutes. If you go beyond that, you have to have approval of council. So you might have found that a bit strange, but that was the process we're in. So I look forward to hearing the debate and I'll have a chance to respond later.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any speakers against the motion? For the motion?
Yes, Mr.
Councillor Quinn.
I'm going to support the motion. I think a number of the issues that have been raised tonight are concerns that I also have, and I'm going to go through those, and I think these were suggested, particularly what Mr. Hayes said, where he said he found 15 inconsistencies or concerns in the report. And the ones that I've noticed are an adverse impact on the amenity of the surrounding residential areas to the east, north and west of the site caused by the proposed excessive building heights, bulk and scale. Shadowing of the proposed buildings, potential there to adversely impact on the gardens, the site's existing trees and significant landscape spaces, including the heritage garden. A significant, and I've taken most of these words from the report. A significant increase in the number of occupied bedrooms across the site and related traffic and vehicular movement impacts. The potential non-compliance with the provisions of Planning for Bushfire Protection 2019 guidelines. A failure of the community needs assessment to establish that the dwelling mix proposed will meet the demand for diverse and affordable housing. And also the justification for a potential reduction in the number of residential aged care facility beds. Also, another reason is failure of the community needs assessment to examine in more detail all the relevant aspects of social impact. And also failure of the proponent to adequately consult with the local community. I think we've heard that on a number of fronts here. And there's also lack of clarity about the types of social infrastructure and services that will be provided on site, particularly if it's going to be under an infrastructure set. And finally, the inconsistency with priority 4 of Hunters Hill's local housing strategy, which encourages compatibility of new housing with existing local character and heritage. Now, much of what I've said there is actually taken from Council's own report. I would like to say, however, that I think Montefiore over the years has been an outstanding community citizen, neighbour, and so on. But I think a lot more work needs to be done to get this one across the line. And I think the amount of information that we've heard tonight coming from all areas, hopefully will encourage the proponent to go back to review what they are proposing and come back to us with another proposal for a gateway determination.
Councillor Priest.
A question, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
please. To the Director of Planning through you. There's been a lot of suggestion to invite the proponent to submit a new proposal. Am I right to say that if council rejects the proposal as brought to the council in the report tonight, they can proceed directly to the Department of Planning to make a
Correct.
decision on gateway?
Correct.
They can.
They can. And I'll let the director elaborate.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, they can. Just want to clarify something. The application was formally lodged on the 16th of June. Under the guidelines, there's councils have 95 days to consider plan proposals. However, the proponents have a right within 90 days to lodge their application to the minister as a review process. And that 90 days expires on the 14th September, which is Thursday.
Okay. So after tonight's meeting,
Yes.
the proponents have 2 days within which they can.
They may, if they have the opportunity to ask for a review and take this.
Irrespective of council's decision, or only in the situation where council rejects the proposal?
Irrespective of the decision, they have the rights, their obligation or their prerogative to do such. Hence our meeting tonight to meet that deadline.
Councillors, Councillor
I
Crassoy.
do have a question.
Question?
And it's one I've had all afternoon actually, and it's come up a few times in the speakers this evening. So it's a not too long-winded way to get there. There were some proposed changes by the New South Wales government to the housing set for a number of reasons, to incentivise uptake of infill affordable housing, accessible housing, et cetera, and so that went on exhibition in December and closed exhibition in January, and the department is still considering that. But the idea of that, those changes to that housing set are to improve, among other things, the design outcomes for seniors and aged care living. There's an explanation of intended effect, and there's a document that Ms. Armstrong referred to, the Seniors Housing Guidelines. Now, in the Seniors Housing Guidelines, they direct you towards the housing set, seniors housing within the housing set. So housing set, seniors housing. And in those guidelines, there's a lot of talk about co-located residential care facilities, which is exactly what's being proposed here. So medium to higher density, lower density, allied health services, independent living units for ageing in place, and aged care beds and potential dementia units. So more or less exactly what you're proposing. And based on these guidelines for seniors housing and the statement of intention and the government's own review of the housing SEP, why would we look at SP2 instead of embracing what the government's handing these developers and local governments, which is an opportunity for
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Did you double check that?
That's live at the corner.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, councillor, please continue.
under the housing SEP, and I know it's not what we've been given, but under the housing SEP, could the proponent ask us to consider some uplift in height and beds within the current use of that site? Mr. Karepis answered a question by Councillor Vergara earlier, saying that health services would potentially be accepted on that site as an allied use within an existing use on that site. So if they've already got an existing use on that site, they can already have allied health services on there potentially. All they really need is some more height in that case. So again, is that something they could possibly do? Could they ask council to review our LEP to give them more height on that site within the current zoning?
My understanding is that the R2 zoning, particularly along Gaza, no, you couldn't. But again, I'll kick to the director who might tell me I'm completely wrong.
Through you, Mayor, their planning proposal at the moment is to provide the certain heights they're asking for and the certain floor space ratio and a certain local area that they're citing, which is the specific DCP. So the specific DCP for the site provides that locality, and the actual height map and floor space ratio map distinguishes what is proposed for the subject site. And that's what they're proposing, and that's it. If the proponent wants to amend that later on, they'll have to lodge another planning proposal to amend it, or have to argue that through a development application process. With my experience, highly unlikely an application will have merit in further giving a certain increased percentage following a current rezoning approval through the state government for that specific use or height, and then they want to further amend it a year down the track. It's it wouldn't be favourable. I hope I answered the question.
Councillor Cresswell.
You did answer that question for me last night. Thank you. This one's more about a planning proposal to change the height limitations within the current zone.
My understanding is that under an R2, which those properties along Gaza, you couldn't, but I'm not sure if that's correct.
Instead of, so I'm
Instead
saying,
of
in a
rezoning.
hypothetical,
Right.
instead of asking us to change it to SP2,
Right.
just asking us to, within the current zoning, give them some more height.
Right.
Is that something someone could potentially do with the existing use on the site that is already there?
Yes. Yes, they can put in a plan proposal to do that. Yes, they can. But
So to retain the existing zoning
yes,
with more height.
they can do that as well. Yes. Yes.
That
On
answers-
a
that does
R2?
answer my question.
Yes.
On an R2 zoning. Okay.
Yeah, they amend the planning proposal each how they wish,
Yes,
and we have to consider that.
thank you. Yeah.
Councillors, any other questions of Mr. Karepis? If not, I'll move back to debate. Councillors, any speakers against the motion? For the motion? Councillor Cresswell.
Thank you, everyone, the staff, the general manager and the community for your feedback into this. And thank you, Councillor Williams and Councillor Quinn, for your thoughts on how we might word this a little differently. I think that the proposal has strategic and site-specific potential, not merit. And at this stage, I don't think it should go to the gateway process. And I implore Montefiore to consider working closer with council rather than attempting to go around us. I've said all along in our debating that we need to work together with our community, you as the proponent, us as the councillors, with the council and with our community. I think that Councillor Williams' recommendation here is really comprehensive, and whether Montefiore decide to work with us or whether they decide to go straight to the gateway or straight to the department without us, I think that this motion speaks spades of how we feel things could be addressed going down the track. I actually love the concept for the site. As most of my colleagues know, I'm a big advocate for placemaking. I'm conscious of ageing and loneliness and building communities. I think the design is potentially beautiful. I don't have a problem with more height. I don't think, if I were in the department, I don't want to have to go back and say, you need to fix this, you need to fix that. Look at the recommendations in the report. This wasn't addressed, that wasn't addressed. I want us to work together to go to the gateway process and say, we as a whole community, council community and the proponent have come up with this beautiful outcome, and there's been compromise and give and take to get there. I want a hydrotherapy pool, I want VPAs, and I don't want to just take it all without giving back. I understand you're a business and you need to make money as well as being a charity. I don't have a problem with any of it. I just don't think that the process has been followed well enough for me to feel comfortable to say it has strategic and site merit yet. I implore you to consider working closer with council and to consider what Councillor Williams has said here. We invite you to come back to the table with us. From the first day you presented to us, I think I made it very clear in a councillor briefing a long time ago. I loved it, and I was the first to stick my hand up and say, I want a hydrotherapy pool in our community and we want to work with you. So please consider not going around council, please consider working with us. And I do apologise to the staff. I know they've put a lot of hours into this. I think that the Department of Planning are wrapping their heads around this sort of co-location design. And I think it's quite beautiful. And their recommendations that Ms. Armstrong referred to, that report, I commend it to a lot of people to look at because, and I'm sure a lot of you have, I think we'll get a better outcome if we just nut this out for a few more months and make it right. And I promise I'll be here supporting it if we work together a little more than we have to this point.
Thank you, councillor. Any speakers against the motion? For the motion? Councillor Sanderson.
Excuse me. After all that's been said, there's probably not a lot more to say, and I thank the community for all of their input, and I also thank Mr. Karepis for putting together a good report that's informed councillors so well, and and some of the community addresses, which are great. One of the things I did a bit of research on, and I think it's important that I say something about it, and that is my concerns about the potential of rezoning to SP2. This has this historical fact, and that's why I asked the question earlier about why, or if there's any precedent about a single planning proposal, both changing to SP2 as well as increasing heights. The research I did on, there was, we were given a number of examples in advice we were given. I tracked those down, and it's quite interesting. Of the 6 that we were given information on, 5 of those were basically church property. The same 5 had other uses, such as chapels, education establishments. I think there was one that was a cemetery. There's also an interesting point in terms of the surrounding heights. All of those developments were compatible with surrounding heights. Some of the local government areas where they had the height controls, some others didn't, but all those developments were compatible with surrounding height. There was one that we were given as an example. There's no building there as yet. The development application was refused in 2021. Some of the other areas that I looked at, the ones that we referred to included in Randwick, Bankstown and Campbelltown. The other ones I had a look at, because they were referred to in the report, were Wallara and Pittwater. Wallara, in Wallara, all of the property that was zoned SP2 that included a seniors housing had been seniors housing since the date of their the date of their LEP, which in that case was 2014. In Pittwater, which of course no longer exists because it's been merged into Northern Beaches, but those councils still use their original LEPs. And in that case, I didn't actually find any places that were zoned for SP2 residential. So I think it's important that we are conscious we don't set a precedent by allowing that SP2 zoning to occur. The residential seems to give us a far better outcome, and I'd be very hesitant about the report in that regard. Again, I don't think it's worth my while repeating so many things that have already been said. I think as a council, we've had a lot of good information come, and I think everyone who's had this input, and it looks as though we're going to get, I think, the best possible result.
Thank you, councillor. Any speakers against the motion? For the motion? Right of reply, councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I echo that point that most of the issues, or all the issues, have been aired here tonight. So I'm not going to keep people here any longer than necessary. But I will like to make a very sincere gesture. Our decision tonight, if this is passed, does not close the door. We're opening the door for both council and the community to better understand what Montefiore is trying to achieve. And as Councillor Quinn pointed out, Montefiore is a long-serving member of our community and a valued member of our community. So I'm sure there's a way to go forward, and I would ask Montefiore to have a think about that, because I think we've heard here tonight that council's willing to look at options and explore it, as is the community. So the door is not closed. There are options to go forward. A lot of what we've heard tonight stems around hypotheticals. what if, maybe, but what is certain here is that we have a proposal that both the staff's report, the local planning panel, and many of the residents that have spoken here today have questions about. And I'm not comfortable in moving forward with a process that doesn't have the facts available and the questions answered. So I hope tonight council will take that next step forward and offer an open door to Montefiore and the community to build a good outcome for everybody.
Thank you, councillor Williams. Councillors, we're all aware of what we're voting for. You've all got a copy in front of you. Yes, I'll therefore put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. That is all the business that we are considering this evening. I declare the meeting closed at 8:14 p.m. Thank you all.